I would like to extend a warm welcome to all members of the Planning Committee, officers and members of the public in attendance at today's meeting. I am Councillor Christine Ward, Chairman of the Planning Committee. I would now like to hand over to Democratic Services to read the housekeeping notes.
Thank you. Please note that this meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's website via YouTube. It will remain available for a minimum of 12 months. I would remind those in attendance to use your microphone when speaking and remember to switch it off once you have finished. Please switch any mobiles and laptops to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. If the fire alarm rings during the meeting, please can everyone leave the room immediately and use the nearest fire exit, but do not use the lift. Please go to the fire assembly point, which is located at the bottom of the car park where the garages are. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies, please?
We do. We've received apologies from Councillors Brand, Riley and Hartman. Thank you.
Thank you. Now go to the minutes. The minutes for the 8th and the 13th of May. Are you all in agreement that these are correct? Agree. Thank you. Could we have any declarations of interest, please? Councillor Richards.
Well, this one of the applications, the first one, is within my ward, but I didn't attend the parish council meeting where it was discussed, so I don't think I need to declare an interest.
Right, we'll now then go to the planning applications. And we'll start with the first one, which is Court Bell Farm. And some of you may be familiar with this one. This is application 24/10176, and this is on page 5 of the agenda. We do have speakers here. We have Mr. Jerry Davis, who is the planning consultant, Mr. Wilson, who's an objector, and Councillor Phil Tandy. We'll go first to the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Right, yes, application for Court Bell Farm. We have quite a small site area for this particular application, which you can see is in 2 elements relating to existing structures on site. Here we have those. The pointer is actually bigger in this than the site area, but you can see one close to the road and one further down here. Aerial photograph again shows the site in relation to the surrounding woodland and the rest of the site. This is a residential property to the north and also to the south here. Now, this plan indicates the area which was subject of an enforcement notice on the applicant's land, and the details of what the enforcement notice required are included in the report, so I won't repeat them here. But we are satisfied, aside from this planning application, that enforcement notice has been complied with. Just for your assistance, we've overlaid the woodland TPO and the sink areas over the site area plan, just so you can see where they are in relation to that. So the green hatched area, which you can see crosses the residential property to the north as well, is the woodland tree preservation order, and the mustard yellow coloured area is the sink designation. So you can see that both elements of the site are either wholly or partially within that area. So moving on to the applicant's plans, they've indicated the extent of the TPO as this dotted line along the plan, which is similar to the extent of the enforcement notice area. This is the diesel tank which has been provided on site. It measures roughly 2 metres in height. And here you can see it located in front of the trees. You can see that there's a bit of a distance between the trees. And you can also see that they've provided a barrier to prevent vehicles and other things being placed on the land, which was subject of lots of removal. And just more close up, you can see that they're located on concrete pads. No bonding is required because the tanks are quite modern these days, so that's also a requirement. But you can see also that vegetation has started to recover. This photograph was taken a couple of months ago when the application was first submitted, and I would imagine that it's now gone beyond that, so there would be more vegetation cover in the area. This is the plans of the container, which is along the road boundary of the site. And you can just about see it located here. This photograph is taken from the entrance into the site, so the road is to the right of the photograph, and there's a lot of vegetation between the road and where the container is. This line here is the boundary fence along the front. This photograph is taken of the same container from within the site. So our recommendation is to approve, because we do not consider that the retention and use of these structures would result in any further harm to the woodland, TPO or the sink. It's not considered that it would adversely affect the natural landscape, and it would enable the continued use of this established commercial enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now go to the speakers. So, Sorry.
To just go through from a local resident, a further representation has been received following the publication of the committee report, where the main issues raised are that the applicant should not have installed the diesel tanks in full knowledge they were located within the cleared area. They also don't consider that the container has been in situ for more than 10 years. A lot of the comments in the letter refer to matters outside the scope of this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jerry Davis, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. This application, as you've heard, was submitted following an enforcement compliance meeting on site with your officers. An enforcement notice was issued last year that requires some more recent and some historic encroachments into the woodlands of the north to be remedied by the removal of parked vehicles and stored materials. That has now been done, but the compliance meeting with your officers revealed that the existing container on the site boundary of Court Hill and the fuel tanks were technically still within the encroached area, and that therefore an application to retain them will be needed, hence the application you have before you today. The container has been in place since at least 2014. We know this because the available aerial images confirm it. The container itself is therefore lawful. It forms in effect part of the existing boundary fence to the site, as you've just seen. Even if it were to be removed, the gap it would create in the fence would then need to be filled for obvious reasons. And any replacement fencing to match the existing will need to be nearly as tall as the container itself. So there'll be nothing to gain by its removal from any visual impact perspective, and it is, as your report confirms, well screened from the highway by existing vegetation. The fuel tanks are sited in a position that allows them to be easily accessed by the applicant's vehicles without having to make unnecessary reversing manoeuvres. There's always been a fuel tank on the site, and the new one is to a higher safety standard. Again, it causes no visual impact in its present position and context. In addition, as you've seen, the site operator has now voluntarily installed a barrier that prevents further unauthorised access into the woodland area, even though such a barrier is not a requirement of the enforcement notice. The site operator has then gone above and beyond what he's required to do and has cooperated fully with your officers. But what's gone before doesn't really matter. The important issue is that for this application is what your policies say, and they are supportive of providing the right conditions for local businesses to thrive in and invest in. This site is a long-standing civil engineering depot, and it should be allowed to adapt to changes in business practice and other regulations it's governed by, providing, of course, this does not cause demonstrable harm to other interests. No such harm would arise through the retention of these structures, as your report confirms unequivocally. Chair, I'm aware that a neighbouring third party has claimed that trees have been felled to create the space for the fuel tanks and that this area wasn't previously covered by hardstanding. Both of these claims are rejected by the applicant and the site operator. The diesel tank has been sited on a slab that the old tank was on, and the smaller AdBlue tank has been sited on a new slab, which itself was laid on top of an old slab. So no new areas of hardstanding have been created. This application has nothing to do with, also has nothing to do with other complaints that the adjoining occupiers have made in reference to in their representations. The key issue is that your officers are satisfied that the aims of the enforcement notice have been achieved and that this application on its own merits and in light of your planning policies is acceptable for the reasons set out in your report. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wilson, good morning. You have 3 minutes.
Chair, honourable members, thank you. In respect of the boundary of the area with the permissions to operate as a civil engineering yard, this is a repeat of the previous planning application from 2021. That planning application was intended to regularise the breaches identified in 2020 by seeking to extend the permitted area to match the encroachment. This was refused and enforcement instructed. Regarding the block plan and location plan, the jagged boundary shows does not match the actual permitted area boundary, either from the 92 decision, the 2014 decision, or the 2020 enforcement notice. Rather, it shows, as planning had pointed out, the extent of the TPO ancient woodland, which corresponds to the extent of the permitted area. And as you can see, the fuel tanks and the containers are well within that area. And to access the fuel tanks, lorries are also going to have to encroach into the ancient woodland. The encroachment breaches became the subject of the 2020 enforcement notice, but this has been ignored because that area is still used, including the area adjacent to the shipping container. Sadly, the enforcement notice did not address replanting of the felled trees in the ancient woodland, the removal of the material used to raise the ground level, and the excessive number of HGVs. Time has now passed because of the tactics which have been used regarding an appeal, withdrawn appeal, an application for a lawful use certificate, non-compliance with the enforcement notice, and now another retrospective planning permission. The timeline should be based on the 2020 breaches rather than today. And the shipping container, one of many on the site, was not in position in 2010. During the time, the operational site has continued to expand beyond that permitted, just as Mr. Davis suggested would happen during the previous planning application hearing. Finally, there is a danger that one of two things will occur here. Either this will be granted and the site will be extended beyond the areas with permission, and no doubt further expansion will continue, or it will be refused and will be no enforcement action, and the applicants will continue to expand the site as they've done in the past, with no regard for NFDC planning decisions and showing total disregard for the system. This committee has the power to send a clearly worded message in this case and other potential cases of planning breaches, but will need the active support of planning and enforcement officers to avoid further losses of ancient woodland and environmental damage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. We now have a letter to be read from Councillor Phil Tandy. I'd like to go ahead, thank you.
The Parish Council wishes to object in the strongest terms to the planning application for the retrospective retention of a storage container and fuel tanks. These two items are both easily moved and therefore should not be allowed to remain in their current positions. Part of the container is agreed that it is within the enforcement area, and the fuel tanks are sited on part of the land that has been slowly developed into the wider area of the yard. The Parish Council is struggling to see, after the last New Forest District Council Planning Committee decision on a previous application, 21-11036, by this applicant in May 2022, that unanimously rejected that proposal and recommended that officers take action to address some of the breaches in planning, that there is now a further application to again try and regularise some of these breaches. We as a parish council don't want to see any further damage of this countryside, and where possible damage reversed when there are other easy alternatives. Both these movable objects could be resited in another part of the yard where there is agreed data on the operational area of those using the yard. The Parish Council asks you to consider the previous history of this site, and as a final thought to consider is, if this application was before you as a new planning application to site these objects, would you grant it? As movable objects, we are fairly certain, as it is in a site of interest for nature conservation and is also covered by a tree preservation order, which has been grossly flouted in recent years, that you would refuse a similar application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members will now go to questions from officers or speakers. Councillor Richards.
I wanted to ask about the container, because we've been told that it's okay because it's been there for 10 years. But surely, once the enforcement action on that container starts, surely that the clock's not still ticking. As the objector said, it wasn't there in 2010, and the enforcement action started in 2020. So it must be less than 10 years that container's been there, mustn't it? Isn't that how it works?
As far as I'm aware, our enforcement team have looked very carefully at this site and have looked at the breaches referred to by Mr. Wilson in his objection letters. And as far as I am aware, they are satisfied that the container has been there for 10 years and is immune, the actual stationing of that container is immune from enforcement action.
Could I just ask, if that container's been there since 2014, what condition is it in? I mean, they don't always last forever. The doors fall off and, you know, I mean, if it's going to be replaced, what colour is it going to be? I mean, is it the same size? How do we stand on that?
Well, you can see, it's difficult to see from the photographs because they're relatively small. It does show signs of wear. I'll give you that. I'm not an expert on how long a metal container is able to remain. But maybe Mark, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but if there is a lawful use to station a container on site, then the container could be replaced without further consent.
Chairman, if I can help and assist, you'll see in your report that the enforcement team, as the case officer said, are satisfied that the container has been there in excess of 10 years. So it's essentially tantamount to a building. That's what we've concluded. Now, if that was to be replaced in a similar or the same dimensions, size, position, I think you could make the case that that would be something that would be accepted and wouldn't need an extra planning permission, as the case officer just said. But it's all about whether the building is immune by virtue of the passage of time. That's that 10-year period. Your case officer and your enforcement officer have come to the view that that's a building that is immune from any further action. And your assessment today is about the use and the use of half of the building.
But we did clear the site of other containers and the enforcement. Why is this one an exception to the rule on that? Because we did make a big effort to get this tidied up, didn't we?
The enforcement notice required them to remove all vehicles and materials from the site, and following compliance with step 1, cease the use of the land in connection with the contractor's yard. So they have removed all vehicles and materials from the area within the enforcement notice, and they have ceased the use of that part of the land. So, and because the container straddles the boundary of the enforcement notice, they've had to cease use of part of the container that falls within that area. This application is to allow continued use of that half of the container.
I just come back to Councillor Richards.
I wondered if we could go back to the slide which showed the enforcement area. So the tanks are right in the middle of that area. So how are the vehicles going to access those tanks without actually using the enforcement area, which they're not allowed to use? They've been told they can't use, and there's no element of this application which says that is applying for permission to use that area to access the tanks.
Yes, thank you, and apologies for not mentioning this in my introduction. If members are minded to recommend to grant permission for this application, then the use of the diesel tanks would allow vehicles to be stationed in front of it while they're refuelling. That would go without saying, and would supersede any requirement on the enforcement notice.
So what you're saying is that in effect, this encroachment which has taken place within that enforcement area in front of the tanks is then going to be made permanent. It's not going to be allowed to regenerate.
It would be available during the refuelling of vehicles. It wouldn't be there. That they wouldn't be able to keep things there, and I don't believe that they would. That, as I've stated in the report, one of the reasons they have positioned the tanks in this location is because the lawful site, narrows adjacent to the large workshop building that they have here, and in order to allow continued use with some of the larger vehicles that they operate on the site to go in and out of the site, the diesel tankers had to be set to one side to allow vehicles to refuel and still allow traffic to pass within the site to continue the operations.
Can I just ask Mr Davis, do you know how often that happens? How often the fuel tanks are used?
I don't, Chair, but it's clearly not all day, every day. I mean, there will be times when vehicles are being repaired, for example, and they fill up before they go out. I suspect 1 or 2 times a day is probably about the average, but I don't have an actual figure for you, sorry.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I've got a question about the container, and I wasn't sure the other officers couldn't really hear his response to this. If we grant permission for the container, does that mean then, it means that obviously if when that's worn out, they can replace it with another container, but does that mean they can build on it? And I suppose they'll still have to come for planning permission. What can they put on that? If we grant permission for the container, because that container, clearly by that picture, and I know there's something about containers, they do have a lifespan, they're not in perpetuity. Can they replace it with another container that's identical, or can they replace it with something different? What is allowed within that planning permission?
Chairman, I'll try and help. As you'll see in your report, you're not granting planning permission for the container. The container is immune from enforcement action and is there from the passage of time. So you're looking today at the use of half of that container. That's the planning applications before you. The operational development is for the retention of the fuel tanks, but the container, you're looking at the use of half of it. As a building, it's been there through the passage of time, and your officers have considered it immune. So if in the future, let's assume your recommendation your decision follows the recommendation, we get into the future scenario you're trying to sort of articulate to us, any replacement of that building with something different to a container would be operational development, new operational development to my mind, and that would require a new planning permission.
Councillor Glass.
Thank you. Going back to the fuel tanks, I noticed they've replaced the fuel tanks with a very modern one. That's great. But when they replaced it, they put it back knowingly in the area that they've been told to move out of. How can this be justified? You know, they had an enforcement notice to take the tank away and put it somewhere else. They took the old tank away and put the new one right back in the same place. So it worries me that although we've got no effect on what's going on in the future, they appear to just ignore any form of notice we've got. How can we justify those fuel tanks knowingly being put back where we said they can't be? There should be, I think those should be removed and put somewhere that was within the allocated area.
I wasn't sure whether there was an actual question in there, but I'm not here to defend the actions of the applicant, but as the enforcement notice required the removal of vehicles and materials, they may have interpreted that other things might be allowed in that area. Also, I appreciate that members generally don't like retrospective applications, but that's the situation we're in, and we have to deal with the application that's been submitted on that basis. And the fact that it's retrospective isn't a reason for refusal.
No, my point was that we've said that nothing should be there.
Councillor Rickman.
Thank you. Could I ask a question of Jerry Davis, please? Trying to get some clarity on that. Has repositioning on the site been considered for the two items?
Mike.
To answer the point that was just made by Councillor Glass, I'm pretty certain the tank was there when the notice was issued. It wasn't replaced. The notice was issued in August 22. The tank's been there for at least a couple of years now. So I don't think that was a situation they put it back where the enforcement said they couldn't. I think the tank was already there in the first place. Sorry, Councillor Rickman, in terms of your question, would you mind repeating it? Yeah,
asking if relocation of the two items on the site have been considered.
Yes.
In day-to-day use.
Yes, I mean, the container, for example, has been there so long now, as you've heard, it's immune from enforcement action. And again, it wasn't required to be removed by the enforcement notice. That required the removal of vehicles and materials. It falls within neither of those categories, same as the tank. So they could move the container, but that would leave a hole in the fence. And then that would have to be filled with a tall sleeper fence, which is basically the same height as the container. So the point is, well, what is the point in doing that? It doesn't really serve any legitimate purpose. The tank could be moved. Yes, it could, but if it's put somewhere else, it's going to affect how that site operates in terms of its throughput and its flow of traffic. as I said in my presentation, they've tried to avoid putting it in a position where vehicles have to reverse into it. Every time a large vehicle reverses, the beepers go off. It's actually quite a noisy operation. And the way they've done it now, it enables vehicles to just pull up alongside it, fuel, and then pull away again. And as you've heard, there's no provision for them to park there full term. A, they couldn't do that because they'd be blocking the access to the tank. And B, that would be a breach of the notice. So whilst there would be a technical requirement for them to pull up to the tank, it's a very short-lived thing.
Councillor Sleep?
Yes, just a question to the officer. We always obviously look at what the parish or the town council's comments are, because they've got more of a history of it as it's developed. But there's 5 bullet points on there. Are you happy that I noticed through your write-up, everything seems to have been responded to. Are you happy that we've covered all those questions from the parish council in their statement?
Okay, right. So firstly, that previous enforcement orders have not been complied with. As far as I'm aware, enforcement are satisfied that what's covered in this application is the only outstanding element on site. The items are movable and not buildings. Well, as we've discussed, whilst the container is, in theory, a movable item, the fact that it's been there for the length of time that it has, we now consider it to be a building, and it has qualified in terms of its siting under time limits. The next point, there seems to be an attempt to regularise previous planning breaches. Well, yes, that's what everybody does try to do when enforcement come knocking on their door. They try and regularise them, which is either through the removal of what they've done or applying for planning permission to retain it, which is exactly what they've done here. The container is visible from the road. This might depend on the time of year, but given the amount of vegetation that's between the road and the container, you can hardly see it from the access into the site. It blends in quite nicely. And then finally, this would not be approved if it was a new application, as it's in an area that is part of National Landscape, SINC, and a designated ancient woodland, that it's noticeably decimated over a number of years. Well, we're not in a situation where it's a new application. It's an established civil engineering site which has been there since the mid-1990s. We have policies where we like to support local businesses, and if the retention of a fuel tank and some additional storage in a container is what this particular business needs, then we have to take the application on its merits as it is at the moment, and not as though it's a brand new field and they're wanting a civil engineering site on it.
So the answer is yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. If you finish with questions, we'll go into debate. Did you, Councillor Glassnow, want to say something? Councillor Sleep.
I'd just like to say, looking at the fuel tank situation, with history on diesel tanks, there's always spillage on the old system, so I would imagine there's grain contamination there. And at the moment, I'd much prefer the tank stayed where it was than be moved to another site, even if it is leak-proof, as is suggested. And I would say that we've got this tank, the size of it, with a big group of vehicles actually feeding from it, there would be a filling time from a tanker coming in to do it actually regularly anyway. But I prefer that it stayed there for the actual site. But there's bound to be contamination in the grain around that area, so even now it's secure. I would prefer it to stay there than chance moving it somewhere else.
Councillor Richards.
The recommendation grant seems to be based on the fact that, the encroachment has already occurred, the damage has already been done. But I think this is slightly missing the point that this damage is temporary. If everything was moved off that area and it was ceased to be used and trees were replanted, perhaps. We've already seen the photograph of how the area where materials have been used is regenerating. It would regenerate, it would revert to the natural woodland, which it has been historically, and the trees, the plants and wildlife would recolonise it. And eventually in time, you wouldn't know that this problem had occurred. Whereas if we grant permission to this, what we are doing is making this damage permanent, because that tank is permanently going to be sited there in the middle of that area, which is part of the enforcement area. And the the vehicles will have to access it. So that area in front of that tank is never going to be allowed to revert to the natural woodland. So it seems to me that by granting this application, we are damaging the ancient woodland, which is covered by a TPO. It's also designated as a site of importance for nature conservation. And it's also in the area of outstanding natural beauty, which is covered by our policy SDR2, which says that great weight will be given to ensuring that the character, quality and scenic beauty of the Cranbourne Chase area of outstanding natural beauty are protected and enhanced. And I just cannot see any way that this is consistent with protecting and enhancing the AONB. And also, continuing on from that, it just opens up to further encroachment, because if we're not going to enforce our own policies, if we're just going to say, oh well, it's okay, you've done this now, we'll just approve it retrospectively, what's to stop further encroachment happening in the future? So I would recommend that we refuse this application on that basis, on the basis of the damage to the ancient woodland and the damage to the area of outstanding natural beauty. So I'd like to make that proposal.
Does anybody want to second that? Councillor Dowd, you want to second that we refuse? Yeah.
Thank you. Once again, I'm totally and utterly disgusted and disappointed. We have a retrospective, and it's part of our planning policies and rules, and we expect people to obey those rules. But this particular rule seems to be overruled every time it comes up. Now, if we're not going to punish these rules or say, no, you can't do it, then, why have we got the rule in the planning policy? Doesn't make sense. And I've got to go with my friend over here. The argument she gives is fantastic. And, these people shouldn't be allowed to get away with damaging the environment as they are, and which is very fragile. It seems to me we're taking this bit of land over whether it's ours or not. And I think, this is not the way we should be going. We should be considering our environment and the rules of our planning, like we have to follow every other rule within society. So I'm very, very disappointed, and I will not be voting for it. Thank you.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. If you go to slide number 11, please, if you just put it on the screen. Now that looks a lovely, nice, neat picture. There's the tank, there's the wall, and the trees behind it. Now, anybody that knows anything about engineering and haulage yards says that's not what it's really like. Trucks are going in and out, vehicles, equipment, they're being fueled on a daily basis, perhaps many times on a daily basis, and the environment becomes dirty, mucky, and the amount of vehicles and diesel being put into the environment around that, because the vehicles have to stop, turn off, start again, it will damage the overall environment. It will affect it. There's no doubt about it. It will become black and dirty beyond that fence. I can understand why the developers put it there, because it's convenient and it's nice for the trucks to slide in. And I know we had vehicles there and we had to have them removed. Bet you at night time they'll be parked there, because they will, because that's how these operations work. The reality is, putting this operation next to a sensitive environment, such as the trees and etc., it's not right, really. It isn't right to put it there, because the two things are in competition. We have an engineering, and all, I'm not trying to deflate the ambitions of the developer and his business, or credit to him, but actually that part of it's in the wrong place. Because we have a sensitive woodland and you're putting a fueling back on, which will be regularly attended on a daily basis by trucks and equipment, churning up the ground, revving up, revving down, so forth. It's in the wrong place. It's as simple as that. And I support the objection, really, because it is in the wrong place. And if we're having a sensitive woodland, we shouldn't put this type of plant next to it. It should be at least on another part of the site, away from that. And that's why I think we should object to it.
Thank you. Councillor Glass.
Thank you. Though it sounds unlikely, I think if we did grant this, is there anything we can put in the permission to stop and make it very obvious where their boundary is and that they cannot, under any circumstances, go outside it? Because they seem to be rather unclear on what is what.
We are not, it wouldn't be, for the purposes of being appropriate to the application which is in front of you, which is the retention of the retention of the use of the half the container and the siting of the diesel tanks, fuel tanks. That application doesn't warrant the requirement to put any fencing up. The overall use of the site and how much land is owned by the applicant, having some of that land within the SINC and the TPO isn't a matter for this committee at this point. But perhaps, whilst I've got the opportunity to speak, I would just mention the point that the original application, which was retrospective to allow the continued use of this area, which was refused by members and a subsequent enforcement notice submitted, did include fencing, which we're now not able to control. And I would also make the point that following the proposal to recommend refusal due to the impact on the trees, the SINC and the natural landscape, it sounds to me that what you're concerned about is the fuel tanks primarily and being located in the area they're located in. Some of you are mentioning whether they should be moved to a different part of the site. I would put it to you that if they're moved to a different part of the site, yes, they might be outside of that area. How is that going to change their impact on the natural landscape? The damage to the woodland and the SINC has already occurred. You can see from the photographs here that there is plenty of space to allow the regeneration of that area. We're not in a position to require them to plant any more trees. And I would just put that there for your consideration. Thank you.
I do believe you misunderstood. I'm talking about in our permission written. Can we make it very, very clear with something written down that we've granted this, but we don't allow them to do anything else?
If we're granting this, we're granting this. They don't have permission to do anything else anyway. That's an unwritten law.
I just wanted to make it 100% clear, because they've obviously misunderstood things before to do this, that they cannot possibly do more. I just can't put it into words at the moment.
Councillor Sleep. Sorry, did you want to come back?
Sorry, Chairman, I was just going to add, in addition to what the case officer has said, to perhaps help Councillor Glass, take you back to a couple of other slides. And on the relevant page of your agenda, you'll see that the red edge for the application proposal is very tight to the container and very tight to the fuel tanks. That's the area that we're looking to grant a planning permission for if you were to go with the recommendation that officers have put to you. So the red edge is so tight that defines the extent of the development proposals before you. And as the case officer said, anything else anywhere else on the site, if it's development, for the purposes of the definition of what is development, then that would either be something that could be permitted development, or it would be something that needed an express permission and could potentially come back before you.
Councillor Sleep.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I could come back to comments that Councillor Wade had said, that picture that shows the truck by the side of the tank, it's in this company's interest. It's a well-used and historical construction vehicle site. It's in their interest to make sure that aggregate and that scalping floor level is as good as you can see now as it would be through the year. If they had big stuff, big units walking around on that site, they'd wreck the surface. So I'm not concerned about that. But what I am concerned about is going back to Councillor Richards' comment, with my history on petroleum industry, is those original tanks would have leaked into that ground. Fait accompli, the horse is bolted, the stable doors, it's too late. But what I'm saying is if we kept it there, unless you actually tell them to dig that ground up and reconsolidate it to bring it back to green pasture, there's bound to be spillage there. I would be much happier that we left sleeping dogs lie and let the unit run as it is now without causing any more problems to the area around that unit. It seems like we've got grass growing around there. It'll be the front of the area that we've had spillage off the tanks. So that grain will be contaminated unless it's dug up and reconsolidated to plant. You're never going to get rid of that. It's better, for my mind, to leave the tank exactly where it is. That's all I'd like to say on that.
Thank you, Councillor Sleep. Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. I have, in a dim and distant past, run such an establishment as this, so I can speak with some knowledge of how these things work. And Councillor Luke has made a point that there will be some seepage into the ground, but it will continue, and the environmental impact of the vehicles using it will be negative to the sink and the sensitive area beyond it. You know, the fact that it's bad now doesn't mean let it get worse. I think we should move it and stop now. And that area can be treated if it's so wished. But I just think that if you're going to put a diesel station, you don't put it on the edge of a sensitive wood. You put it on another part of the site. And I just think that's not really been thought out properly. It's been I can understand why they've done it, because it's easy for the developer, drive in, fuel up and off you go. But from an environmental perspective, it's in the wrong place. And while there is an argument, and I take the point on that, but I think the continued damage and impact on the environment is sufficient. We should object to it.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything to say? Councillor Woods.
I've listened to all the arguments, and it seems to me not enough research and interest has been put to relocating the tanks. It seems to me that the answer would be to relocate the tanks out of the area of natural beauty, and the problem solved. So I certainly won't be supporting I certainly will be supporting the proposal. Thank you.
Councillor Dowd.
Yeah, I think the regularising access is not in enforcement, and I think that's the crux of the problem. I wasn't on the planning when enforcement was voted for. We voted for that. Regularising access is going against the spirit of that decision, and I think we should uphold the enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If nobody has any... Councillor Rick.
Yeah, just trying to balance the two sides of this, because it is quite difficult, and that's why I asked about relocation. But we still cannot stay here this morning that they are getting away with it. It's an established use on a site, and there's the enterprise angle to it. I think I've got to promote that as well to try and get an even argument. You can't just say you can't have that there because it is established there, unless you can organise some relocation on some other site, which I know Councillor Sleep will know is not going to be happening, is it, in that area? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we do have a recommendation to refuse, but first of all, we'll come back to the speakers. You have a minute to respond.
Thank you, Chair.
Jerry Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. Various suggestions have been made about what the site operator has done. I just want to be clear that a lot of these encroachments that you've been talking about, particularly the ones you see in the photographs, occurred long before the current site operator took over the site. The encroachments he made were actually further down the site, and which aren't subject to this application at all. So a lot of these things have been in place for a long time. So the suggestion that the applicant or the site operator has done this and that needs to be taken with some care, I think, because he hasn't been there that long. Mrs. Baxter made the point, which is a very good point, which is that moving the tank away from where it is, it's still going to be, it's a civil engineering site. It's going to have fuel tanks. It's always had fuel tanks. Moving them to another part of the site further away from the woodland will not, as far as I can see, suggested by Councillor Wade, make the ecology of the area any different. Your own ecologist has supported, or not objected, I should say, to the location of the tank in this area. So if you're going to refuse it for that reason, and you don't have any evidence to support that, I would just cast a word of warning about whether that's an appropriate thing to do. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Wilson, you have 1 minute to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to point out, these encroachments have happened since 2018. As you can see, the tank here is well within the ancient woodland, and as these red and white barriers have been placed, that means those are also in the ancient woodland, and therefore, as a result, lorries and other vehicles are going to have to go across the ancient woodland to access the tanks, which were not originally there in the 1992 permissions that granted access, that granted the site. There was a plan which shows where the tanks were. They were not in that location. So that any leakage that has occurred already in a different place. So that could be where the tanks are returned to. On the subject of the container, I submitted a picture from Google Earth from 2012, which shows no container. It was not there in 2012. The enforcement notice was issued in 2020. That's 8 years, not 10 years. And I think also the container is made of material. And
You have had your minute. Thank you. We need to move on. Right, we'll go then with this recommendation. Sorry?
Come back before you go to the...
Yes, sorry, I just allow Mark to speak.
Members, thank you. Just before you go forward, I just wanted to get some clarification, if I can, on the potential reason for refusal that's been put forward. Just for clarity, before you take your vote, so we all know what we're voting on, reference was made, I think, by Councillor Richards to the policy STR2. That's specifically with regards to protection of the countryside, the Cranbourne Chase AONB as it was, and the adjoining national park. And that policy sets out that in determining development proposals, great weight will be given to ensuring the character, quality, scenic beauty of the Cranbourne Chase AONB is protected and enhanced. From the commentary that I think you put forward with reference to that policy, Councillor, you talked about the damage has already been done. This would be making the damage permanent. And again, we're damaging the ancient woodland and the sink. And it potentially opens up to other things. Mr. Davies just a moment ago made reference to the lack of an objection for your ecologist who's looked at the sink. There's narrative in page 9 of your report about the impact on the sink and the protected trees. Bottom of page 8 and over the top of page 9, your case officer has looked at how the visual impact of the site is limited. There's no public rights of way which offers view into the sites, and thinking about consideration on the effect of landscape character. So my question is, what's the harm in relation to that policy? I'm struggling to attach the harm from the fact that the damage has already been done. I don't know if you can help me by clarifying that.
Councillor Richards, do you want to say something? And then I'll come to you, Councillor Wade.
My point was, at the moment, the damage is temporary. If everything was taken off that site and it was stopped being used, it would, in time, regenerate naturally. But by granting this permission and allowing the vehicles, to drive across that area, which is supposed to be ancient woodland, drive across the area in front of those tanks, then that damage is permanent. There's no going back. We have lost that ancient woodland forever. So, in other words, this granting permission would cause damage to the ancient woodland with its sink and TPO protections, and also would damage the scenic beauty of the AONB, now called a national landscape.
I can, Chairman. So it's the movement of vehicles to and from the tank through an established site, and it's that vehicle movement is what you're suggesting is having the harm on the quality and scenic beauty of the AONB.
It prevents that area from regenerating as natural woodland.
Can I just come to Councillor Wade? Sorry, Councillor Wade.
I mean, the issue is we're concerned about further incremental damage to the environment. That is the phrase. Further incremental damage for the environment from this operation. It's already done the level of damage, but it's further incremented by the continued use of vehicles and heavy plants, refueling, and producing more emissions into the local environment. That's the issue. It's further incremental.
Not wanting to labour the point then, Chairman, that particular policy test isn't in your policy STR2.
Yeah, it's not in STR2. So we can do damage, but that's okay.
Your policy STR2 looks for great weight to be given to ensuring character, quality, scenic beauty of the AONB is protected and enhanced. It doesn't talk about incremental damage to the environment from those. So I wonder if there's an amenity policy we need to look at instead.
Councillor Dowd.
May I ask a question on clarification of that? If we are maintaining and enhancing, how is incremental damage maintaining and enhancing? Those two things are incompatible. Thank you.
I mean, to my mind, Chairman, when you read through your report, you're quite clear that the officers looked at the impact on the landscape, including the national landscape, and we've looked at the impact on the sink and the protected trees. And your technical advice, your specialist advisors and the ecology department specifically has not raised any concerns about the impacts. And that would have considered the impact on the sink, the woodland. So, like I said, I'm not trying to perhaps be difficult. I'm just trying to make sure that if we're going to recommend refusal, we've got a robust reason and a robust policy hook to be able to do that. I'm not convinced at the moment, in terms of advising you as a planning authority, that maybe STR2 is the right policy. I understand your point completely. I understand the rationale and the direction of travel you're going. But I just think before you take a decision, we need to make sure we've got an appropriate policy hook. Because as you heard from Mr. Davis, if we're acting unreasonably, then there's that risk of an award of costs if the applicant was to go to appeal. And we need to make sure our decision making is robust.
I think they're important comments, actually. Councillor Dowd.
I understand there's an element of value judgment about this. So, you know, I fully respect the views of the officers, but it is a balanced decision. Given that there was an objection previously by this council, that decision was weighed, there was a decision made at that time. I think we should be able to give some weight to the fact we'd already made a decision about that. So it's not looking at it from a fresh perspective, it's looking at that with that weight of decision hitherto. So I think, yes, it is a value judgment. I think it is important that if we are making an assessment based on the special value of that land, and there is a concern about incremental damage that is going to further affect that site, with that history that we made a decision on that previously, I think that, you know, in my view, the weight of judgment is on refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richard, you have something else to say, and then we're going to stop and go.
I just want to point out the previous reason for refusal was for the previous planning application when we were talking about encroachment into this woodland was based on policies ENV3, ENV4 and STR2. So perhaps those are the ones.
I will allow the officers a little time. We have to get this one right. Okay. Councillor Wade, while we're
Thank you,
waiting.
Chairman. I mean, just a final point, really. We refused it in the beginning for the right reasons to protect the environment. I take the officer's point that the wording in the policy may not talk about incremental damage, but because we wanted to protect the environment in the beginning, shouldn't mean that that feeling of desire to protect the environment should remain steadfast, because the environment is tangible. And clearly the incremental damage, the impact on it will get worse and worse, and it will affect it further. And we are therefore right in maintaining the position of protecting the environment and in objecting to it.
I mean, this is a company that's been established for many, many years. This isn't new. Do we have an answer yet again?
Chairman, if I can help, and I'm grateful for Councillor Richards taking us to ENV 3 and 4 as well. I'm going to take you to another one of your policies, though. And my colleague has taken me to policy DM2. DM2 is in your local plan part 2, one of the older policies. And DM2 looks at the implications for development on a sink, of which this site is part of. So DM2 looks at development which would result in damage or loss to a site of biodiversity, geological value or local importance, and that local importance includes a sink. Will not be permitted unless the benefits of the development clearly outweigh the harm it would cause to the site and the loss can be mitigated to achieve a net gain in biodiversity. So I think that's probably your hook in terms of the case that you've put to us rather than perhaps the STR2. It does come with that health warning that I've given you already, though, and Mr. Davis has about you've got no technical support from your ecologist making concerns. But that I think would be the potential policy hook would be to use policy DM2. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. This is a hard decision, I know, but we do need to go to the vote. I think we've given it a lot of time. So the proposal is to refuse, and that was put forward by Councillor Richards and seconded by Councillor Dowd. So all of those in favour of refusal, please raise your hands. Against refusal? 1, 2, 3. 1 abstention. So that has been refused. Thank you. We now come to the next agenda item, which is on page 13. Oakhaven Hospice, application number 23/11094. We don't have any speakers. We don't have any interest on this one, so we'll go straight into the presentation. Mr. Fanning, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Right, there we go. Many of you may be familiar with this site. The site operates as a hospice care facility. The site has expanded over the years from more modest beginnings. You can see there's, we'll have a look in the buildings there. Most of the development is currently in this sort of north east quadrant of the site with a good amount of open space remaining. We'll have a look in a moment at what the application actually proposes. Just to have a quick conversation about the sort of site, the context of the site and the wider area. We've obviously got the more built-up area of Lymington situated to the north of the site. Immediately to the north and to the east of the site, this land has been allocated as part of Strategic Site 6. As part of an update to the report. The report itself does discuss an application that's been submitted on this land to the east for a number of dwellings as part of Strategic Site 6 development. From the date of the application the report being written, another application has come in for the land to the north as well to be developed again for residential housing as part of a mixed development. The actual application site itself forms part of our designated greenbelt land, which is discussed in a bit more detail in the report, and the land to the south is also part of the New Forest National Park. So obviously quite a few various policy considerations and constraints going on in and around the development site. In terms of the greenbelt policy, as I said, it's discussed in more detail in the report. As a quick summary, basically development typically shouldn't be approved within the greenbelt land, subject to certain specific exemptions. As laid out in the report, we're not confident this meets any of the immediate exemptions. However, there is a very special circumstances criteria exemption, which we've discussed in a bit more detail, and I will discuss in a bit more detail when we get to the actual development itself and what we're looking at as part of the proposal. Just to give a bit of context on the application site and how it's laid out, as I said, you can see there most of the building is in this part of the site with some open space here. The site does have two vehicular accesses, so there's this one here which forms part of their road, and there's another one up to the north here. We'll just have a quick look at what the development is in a bit more detail. So at the moment we've got some small storage buildings here, and there's a proposal to replace those with a new larger structure. And there's an existing single-storey extension here, which is again proposed to be replaced with a larger structure. We will get into what exactly those forms look like in a second, but just to give you a bit of context on what the application site looks like. This is looking into the site from that access to the south. This is looking into the site from the southern access off Lower Pennington Lane. This is just to give a bit of context on what the sort of highway looks like in Lower Pennington Lane, which is reasonably rural in character without footpaths and the like, which does have some implications for sort of accessing the site. This is within the site itself. You can see that central courtyard area, looking into sort of the main suite of buildings. And this is that sort of suite of little storage buildings that are being replaced that I was talking about. So just keep that layout in mind when we're looking at the plans in a second. This is the existing sort of single-storey extension bit that is being replaced as part of the proposed development. This is just sort of looking round that connecting building and then round looking over into the east of the site, which is currently an agricultural nursery, but as I said, as part of the Strategic Site 6 development has been allocated for potential redevelopment. This is again looking from the more southern part of the site into the site being developed, and this is that building that's being redeveloped here. And this is just to give an indication of what the rest of the site looks like in terms of its more verdant character and nature. So in terms of actually looking at the development that's coming forward, this is the replacement building here, which is going to be 2 stories. This is the replacement building here, which is going to be sort of 3 stories with sort of 2 stories and then some accommodation up in the roof form. You can see there's a sort of dual pitch gable form with a flat roof section in the middle to provide some additional accommodation. This is just for some indicative drawings showing an indicative relationship with the potential development going on in theory to the east, although that development has not been consented or in any way approved yet. So this is very indicative in nature rather than being anything that we can rely on. So this is just an existing view of the storage buildings. So we'll just have a look at the building that's proposed to replace that. So this is the flank elevation that will be looking out onto the east of the site. So it's got a very high level window. We'll see a section in a second. You won't get any outlook out of that window, but it will provide light. So it's mostly a blank elevation on that frontage, and then a more active elevation fronting into the site. That's just to give a section of the side of the buildings. Just to give some context, at ground floor level, this building is primarily going to be storage, retained for storage use, but at first floor level, we'll have a training and teaching element. This is one of the issues we did have some concerns with in the application, because there was concern that there might be an associated uptick in vehicular traffic associated with having potentially up to 40 people visiting the site on a specific day. The specifics of that are discussed in more detail in the report, but our consideration was that a condition to control management of how that is arranged will be sufficient to mitigate concerns in that regard. Encourage car sharing and give instructions to people on how to visit the site and make sure that there are arrangements in place so that the parking capacity on the site is sufficient to meet the demands on those specific days. This is just to give you some idea of how that space will be laid out. You can see there that high level window that will not provide any outlook or overlooking towards the east. Just to give a bit more context on the wider development of the site, you can see here the proposed new larger building, which will have a sort of link into the existing buildings. Obviously, the building is somewhat more substantial than the other buildings immediately in its context. Our assessment was that the site was large enough to accommodate for that. The building itself, this is the existing building, which currently has a number of units associated with the care facility at the ground floor level. So this is just what the building is going to look like. You can see that there's an inclusion in the roof form there from a lift shaft, and then some accommodation in the roof form there. At ground floor level, there will be a relatively minor uptick in the accommodation for the actual immediate care facility use, 2 additional rooms, but the majority of the building is proposed to provide additional sort of staff facilities and office space associated with the use. As part of the Greenbelt considerations, we did weigh up the sort of relative value and merits in terms of the very special circumstances, but we do recognise that the wider site does provide a sort of a suite of care that is not just the primary care facilities and rooms. So we considered that the specific justifications laid out and the specific use of the site justified the development in the context of the Greenbelt designation. So we came to the conclusion that there were very special circumstances that did exist that justified the proposal. We felt that the other matters, the parking and the highways issues, could be addressed by condition, and that the building itself could be accommodated in the site comfortably. So for those reasons, we've laid out a suite of conditions that we think mitigate the potential harm associated with the development, and we have recommended approval on that basis. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So questions, please, for officers. Councillor Sleep.
To the officer, the first building that you showed us, the training facility, are we in a position to actually say, because of the future development on that face, we've actually asked them to build this sympathetically to take into account the future houses beyond that tree belt that you've actually superimposed that may happen? They've actually taken that into account, haven't they, so that they're not overlooking already when they put the new building up. Is that correct?
Yeah, both buildings have been designed to limit potential outlook over to the east of the building. The other building as well, although it is set further back, has also been designed so that this is primarily locker rooms or toilets or corridors and the like, and it only has high-level windows at floor level on this elevation, or windows serving a corridor. So both buildings have been designed to sort of mitigate potential overlooking concerns about the development to the east.
Right, do we have any more questions? There's no questions, we'll go into debate. Welcome, Councillor Crizell. Councillor Rickman.
Thank you very much. For anybody who's followed the development of Oakhaven Hospice, as I have since the 90s, there was a contention originally about this being in the green belt. Time has proved it's just the right place to do it. The incredible development and progress of the work and care that's provided by Oakhaven is incredible. And if anybody as mine has, his heart has been touched several times in my life by the work that they do. If there was ever a reason for any exemption of any policy, this is it. And I would propose the recommendation, Chairman.
Okay, so that's proposed by Councillor Rickman and seconded by Councillor Glass. Do we have any further comments in debate? Councillor Wade.
Just one, Chairman. I think we all recognise that what Councillor Rickman said is absolutely right, and we all support that view.
Thank you very much. I think everybody seems to be in agreement. I think we'll just go straight to the vote. We don't have any speakers, so the recommendation is to grant. That's been proposed by Councillor Rickman, seconded by Councillor Glass. All of those in favour, please raise your hands. That's unanimous. That's been granted. Thank you very much. Right, we'll now go on to our last application, which is two parts. So you'll find it on page 29, Avon Farm, Ringwood Road, application number 23/10037. This has been with us before, and many of you may remember this. We just have one speaker, Mrs. Carol Evans. If you'd like to go ahead. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping ahead. Sorry, we need to go to the presentation first. So Jessica, if you'd like to go ahead with the presentation.
Chair, just to be clear, there are two applications for this same site. One is a listed building application. The presentation is the same, so I will be showing the second one. So the application site is at Avon Farm in Sopley. As Councillor Ward said, both applications have previously been heard at Planning Committee in 2021, which members approved, though the development was not implemented, and the same scheme has been resubmitted, which is before us today, and we're here as the proposal is contrary to policy DM20. So this is the local context. The site lies to the east of the River Avon. The site is within the green belt and the open countryside. And the site forms a group of listed buildings which are associated with the farmhouse, which is this building here, and associated former barns and stables. There is also a building in the garden. This is a cob building, and that's a building at risk. These are the site photos. So this is the coach house viewed from the road, and coach house and stable, which is viewed from the road. And these are of the internal courtyard. This is the farmhouse, and this is the West Range barn. This building is proposed to become a new dwelling as a residential conversion. And this is the rear view of the West Range barn and the farmhouse. This is the coach house and stable, and that's proposed to be changed to residential annex. So this is the existing site plan. As you can see here, this is the West Range barn, and this is the proposed new dwelling, and this is the coach house and stable, which will be an annex. This is the proposed site plan, and it shows the boundary of the wall where the site will be severed. The officer report sets out the benefits of the proposal against the harm in breaking up the heritage assets, and the Conservation Officer has raised no objection to the proposal subject to planning conditions. One of these conditions includes to secure the repair and renovation of the Cobb building, which is the building at risk, and this will be secured by a pre-commencement condition. These are the existing elevations of the site, and this is the proposed. So it's a relatively light touch externally, and includes the installation of fenestration to serve the dwelling. This is the existing elevation for the courtyard buildings and the proposed elevation. So again, relatively light touch with the introduction of fenestration. These are the existing floor plans, ground floor plans, and the proposed first floor plans. So proposed ground floor plans. So there's additional accommodation in the West Range barn and the coach house. And these are the existing floor plans and the proposed floor plans. So it would introduce new accommodation in the first floor. On balance, whilst the proposal would be contrary to policy at DM20, the proposal would reuse the existing buildings and bring the disused listed buildings back into a viable use that will secure their long-term retention, which has considerable heritage benefits. The proposal would provide one new dwelling in the district, and it would secure the repair of the Cobb building, which is a building at risk. The public benefits of the proposal are considered to outweigh the less than substantial harm to the listed buildings, and the application has secured the required habitat mitigations. As such, the recommendation is to grant subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now come to the speaker. Mrs. Carol Evans, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and members. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. As set out by your officers, this proposal to convert 2 of the barns at Avon Farmhouse is the exact same scheme approved unanimously by Planning Committee in January 2020. Due to matters including the COVID pandemic and the sad loss of the owner-occupier of the farmhouse, Mrs. Bath, this approved scheme was not implemented before the permission lapsed. Hence, the application for renewal is back before you today. The 5 former agricultural barns that make up the majority of the courtyard buildings occupy over 66% of the ground floor area of built form. This is a disproportionately large amount of ancillary storage space for a dwelling. As listed buildings, the obligation for continuous maintenance is becoming increasingly burdensome. Securing a viable use for the buildings secures a long-term incentive to invest in, maintain and improve these structures. Planning policy is clear that there is a desirability of putting heritage assets to viable use consistent with their conservation. The proposal follows this principle. National planning policy supports the conversion of existing buildings within the countryside to create new homes. The formation of one new high-quality home plus an annex to the main farmhouse represents considerable investment through the sympathetic conversion to secure the long-term future of these buildings. This includes the repair of the Cobb building before implementation of the works to the 2 main barns as an additional material benefit. The proposal has attracted no public or parish objection. We have worked closely with your officers, something I wish to thank them for. I respectfully request that members continue to support the proposed improvement works to breathe life back into these buildings and to secure their long-term future. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Questions, please. Councillor Richards.
In the reports, reference was made to the harm which would be caused by breaking up the historic asset. I just wondered if you could explain more about that. I didn't really understand.
Yeah. So the part of the significance of a heritage asset includes the development that is there, how it's been used over time, and its significance and setting. So this building here is the former farmhouse, and the associated buildings were in use by the farmhouse, so the coach house stables, cart shed barns. So they have historically been used together as one under the same ownership. So the harm referred to there is in breaking up that ownership. So the site would be severed, part of the site would become in new ownership, and that's where the harm is to breaking up the heritage assets.
Councillor Sleep.
Yes, to the officer. Following on from the speaker, Mrs Evans, obviously in the proposed development listed, you've actually said this application is effectively a resubmission of application 11595, which was approved by our council. Has anything changed on that since then, except the date?
No.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to ask a question? I think it's all quite clear. Debate. Councillor Wade.
I propose we accept the officer's recommendation. It's exactly the same plan that we approved before.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Dowd. We'll come back to the speaker. You have a minute.
I think there's nothing further to add. Thank you very much for your support, members.
In that case, we'll go to the vote. So the proposal to accept the recommendation, which is to grant, proposed by Councillor Wade, seconded by Councillor Dowd. All of those in favour, please raise your hands.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
That's unanimous. That's been granted. Thank you. We'll now go to page 43, which is the listing building alterations. I'm not sure we need to go through the whole presentation again. Do you just want to bring up some photos or some photos to look at? But I think we're all in agreement. Okay. So do you want to say anything?
Nothing further to add, Madam Chair.
In that case, we'll go straight to the vote. So I need a proposer and seconder. Councillor Rickman to propose and Councillor Glass to second. So the recommendation is to grant, proposed by Councillor Rickman, seconded by Councillor Glass. All of those in favour, please raise your hands.
It's unanimous.
And that's unanimous, so that's been granted. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here this morning. I just wish you a good rest of the day. I hope the sun comes out soon. So the meeting's